In the last section, we installed Axios as a dependency to our project. We're now going to use Axios and some documentation in the Unsplash API to make a request over to Unsplash and then eventually just console log out a list of images that will then eventually show to our users. So this section is going to be all about trying to read some of the Unsplash documentation and understanding how to make a request. All right, so I'm going to flip back over to my documentation. I still have the documentation here on how we search for photos. So it says that in order to make a search for a list of photos matching a query, we're going to make a GET type network request to an endpoint of search/photos. In order to make a GET request with Axios, back here inside of onSearchSubmit, we will call axios.get. This GET function is going to take two separate arguments. The first argument is going to be the address that we want to make a GET request to. And then the second argument is going to be an object that will have a bunch of options that will customize this request. So let's first make sure that we understand how to get some path in here or some endpoint that will make our request to. Now, as you just saw in the documentation, it says that we want to make a request to the endpoint search/photos. But it's not just search/photos that we're making the request to. We actually have to get the root URL for the Unsplash API first, and then we can enter search/photos. So to get the root URL for Unsplash, I'm going to go back up to the top left-hand side of the left-hand nav over here, and I'll click on, under Schema, Location. And so the location of the API, or the root URL for the API, is api.unsplash.com. So I'm going to copy that right there. I'll pull it back into my editor and put it in as the first part of the path that we are going to make a request to. Now this is just the root URL of the API. To actually access the endpoint that's going to allow us to search for photos, we now need to access search/photos. So I'll go back over and add in to the very end of that, search/photos. And of course, make sure you have a / between the .com and search. All right, so this right here is going to specify where we want to make a GET request to. But in order to actually get access to the Unsplash API, we have to do a little bit more work beyond this. We have to actually identify ourselves and who is trying to access the Unsplash API. So in order to get some documentation or instructions on how to do that, I'm going to again scroll up on the left-hand side and find the section marked as Authorization. Inside this public actions right here, it tells us how to identify ourselves or identify requests that are being made to Unsplash. So they're telling us that we can do two things. We can either include a header in the request called authorization that contains our personal access key, or we can add on the access key to a query string when we make the request. Either way is going to work just fine. Now we're going to go ahead and take the route of adding in a header of authorization, because eventually we're going to come back to this code, this Axios code right here, and do a little bit of a refactor to really simplify some stuff. And when we do that refactor, it's going to be a lot easier if we use this header approach. All right, so back over here inside of axios.get, remember I had said that there was the second argument that allows us to configure a request. One of the options that we can put inside there is a headers object. This is going to add on some number of headers that we are making, or headers on the request that we're making to the Unsplash API. So we want to add on a header of authorization, and we want that to have a value of client ID and then our actual access key right after that. Now, some things to triple check here. Make sure when you put on authorization right here, you have a capital A. The reason it needs to be capital is because the Unsplash API is expecting a header with a capital A authorization. The other thing to double check is make sure that in client ID, you have a capital D, not a lowercase 1. All right, so now we have to put in our access key. We saw the access key just a moment ago when we created our application. So to get back there, you can go to Your Apps at the top, and then open up the project we just created, and then scroll on down to our keys right here. So I will copy my key, and then go back over and paste it in after the client ID. And make sure you got a space between the client ID and the access key. All right, so now one last thing we have to do. I'm going to go back over to the Search Photos API documentation. So here's Search Photos, and you'll notice that when we make a request to this endpoint, we have to include a query parameter, a parameter literally called query, and that's going to contain the search term that we want to use. So in order to add a query string, or this query param, to our request with Axios, I'm going to find that second argument, the options object, and right above the headers key value pair, I'll put in params. Params specifies the different query string parameters that we want to add into this request. So in our case, we want to add in a parameter of query, and we want to set its value equal to the term that was passed into the onSearchSubmit function. So I will put term in there like so. So the net result of that line right there, essentially it's going to add on to the end of this request URL something like query equals my term, or in our case, if we're searching for cars. That's going to be the end result. Now, one thing not to forget here, I missed a comma at the end of that line. Make sure you get that comma as well. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So this right here is going to make a request over to the Unsplash API, make a search for some number of photos. Unsplash is going to send back a big blob of JSON to us describing all the different photos that it found. So last thing I want to do is save this file, and we're going to test it out in the browser really quickly. Now, one thing I want to mention right now is that we're not doing anything with the data that gets returned. So in order to actually make sure that the request gets issued, I'm going to pull open my network tab over here inside of my Chrome browser. I'm going to clear the request log, and then I should be able to type in some search term here, like say cars, hit enter, and then see 2 requests appear. Now, the reason that you see 2 requests is because technically the request we are making is what is referred to as a CORS, or cross-origin resource sharing request. That goes into way more detail than we need to know, but essentially all you really need to understand is that the request we care about is the second one on here, the one marked with a method of get. We don't really care about the options one too much. So I'll look at the get request, I can select it, and then go to the preview tab right here, and I should see some results for the data that was fetched. So I'll open up results, and it's going to show me the first 10 images that were fetched from the Unsplash API, matching the search term of cars. And so I can expand these, and it will show me a ton of different data about the images that were searched. Just to make sure that this worked successfully, on this first result right here, I'm going to find the URLs property, expand that, and then I will copy the URL of about like this regular one right here. Now it's a really long link, so make sure you get the entire thing. So I'm going to copy that, open up a new browser tab, put in that link that I just copied, and sure enough, it gives me an image of a car. Perfect. All right, so now that we've got our data, or at least we've got our request to get the data, we'll take a brief pause right here. When we come back in the next section, we'll start to think about how we're going to get the data out of the request that is made right here, and eventually render a list of images on the screen using it. So quick pause, and I'll see you in just a minute.